And it'll be made available on request. So please email me if you require access to this, and I'm going to make it available through iManage Share Medium for people that want to get access to it. It's not an interactive session, however. If there's time at the end, then we can answer some questions in a Ask Our Graham session, and that was for the benefit of those of you who remember blind data in the 80s. So please use the IM function at the bottom. We'll be holding one-to-one sessions in the days and the weeks following this, so please email me if you would like us to come to your offices and discuss this further. And we'll not be discussing licensing costs in any detail in this session, but we'll possibly refer to estimates of consultancy and implementation. That will be done in the one-to-one sessions. So I'm just going to give you a quick State of the Union. This session has been recorded and has been requested by over 80% of clients in a quest to understand what we recommend as the best business practices around archiving of data and deletion of matter content. Obviously, we can offer our experiences of what we're seeing in the marketplace, but we advise you to take your own advice on your retention policies as to when and what you can delete. And we can help you build the workflows and the tools to execute these policies. So, without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Graham Haldane, who is our Technical Pre-Sales Director.
Thank you, Derek. Good morning, everybody. So just to follow on from and echo some of the comments that Derek's just brought up there. The turnout today, over 25 people, I think, on this webinar today, and with our governance session this afternoon in London with another sort of 30, 40, 50 people coming along to that. This really is one of the biggest topics that I'm sort of dealing with clients on a daily basis, and certainly one of those questions that everyone seems to want to really bottom out and flush through at the moment. So today's a little bit different from some webinars that you may have attended with me. Firstly, and I'm sure there'll be a cheer via IM, there isn't really a slide deck around this as such. This is more of a download from my mind, and then to show you some of the ways that we can overcome archiving and destruction issues. So we're going to start off with archiving as a general theme. And I'm just going to share my screen. And if that's going to work. So again, if one person can just say yes if you can see the screen okay, just to make sure that you're going to get it in context. Perfect. Thank you, Tom. So archiving really is something that some firms are doing to certain degrees. Other firms never really implemented it or embraced it as part of their initial iManage implementation. Archiving has several different reasons why people turn it on. Obviously around governance and around structuring of data, which we're going to come on to. But there are other more indirect benefits around the archiving of data. One of the main ones would be to keep your live, in quote, sort of WIP database, your current matters or projects, nice and lean and very focused around active work. It can really help for end user adoption where data is looking in live is the stuff that they're working on. It reduces the clutter, if you will, around older casework and allow them to sort of hone in and find that information very much more quickly, especially in conjunction with something like the new iManage Work 10 UI, using the facets and filtering, as well as the excellent full text search capability. But the other reason that people are mainly doing this as well is around governance and around structuring information and preventing people from actually accessing data. So actually a workflow this would be, and if we here in workspace control, so Phoenix's workspace management solution, if we go into our actual built-in archiver of this product, we can set up and declare rule-based archiving policies for different types of workspaces or matter types, essentially. So I set up a pretty simple three-step process here for my corporate workspaces. And if we go into one of this, step one in a typical sort of archiving process would be to actually declare the contents of this matter as a record. When we declare something as a record in iManage, it locks it from editing. Typically, any email you file today into iManage is already declared as a record. But what it would do is stop any documents that currently exist being changed or modified. We think about this in the round and in the workflow. When a matter is closed, and by closed, we usually take a feed from the practice management system. That tends to be the source of all information within a firm or the ERP, depending on your sector. When that engagement is finished, and by finished usually means that all bills have been settled and invoicing has been dealt with, then somebody in the finance team marks that engagement as finished. We pick up on that change, and in this first stage, we're just going to declare that content as non-editable anymore. What that actually means is that you then have a fixed position at the end of the engagement where how the data was. And as you can see here, we can specify in all of these processes, we can focus them across your entire estate, or actually take them to a specific workspace template and actually mix and match that with other metadata. So I've selected a corporate template because I have a very granular system in here. If I just have a single template for active projects, it's not a problem. We'll show you how to overcome that. But then I also have the action. So I can move and declare. But for this phase, I'm just going to declare the content. And I'm going to declare the content based on some criteria. So from my ERP, I'm picking up a status field. So matter typically would be open when we're working on it. When it goes through that closure process in finance, they're going to change that status to closed. We're also going to take a closed date, very important when we come on to destruction and retention. And we're going to say 1 day after the closed date and the status is closed, run that job, declare it all as record. Don't move it, leave it in the live DB. What that then allows you to do is have a window of opportunity for people to file their content. A popular sort of issue that we see is that people archive data too quickly. They may archive it after a week of something being closed. What that then causes is the fact that fee earners tend to get around to managing their inbox and filing email, or maybe a third party or the client sends you in a lot of documents, maybe the part of the trial bundle or a case file, and you need to add that to the matter at that point. So my suggestion to clients when looking at archiving is to declare it to actually secure the information and to preserve how it was at the end of the engagement, but then to have a multiple step process where when you come to move it to your archive database, add on 180 days, however long you feel you need to add content in and give the lawyer that window or the professional that window of opportunity. And again, this is where you need to be discussing with the business and with risk and compliance and all necessary parties what they're looking for. And certainly throughout all of this, and anyone that's coming this afternoon to our governance session in London, I talk a lot about the engagement that you need to get with the business. Archiving and destruction from a technical perspective is fairly straightforward to implement, but it's all about understanding the data flow within your firm, the requirements of different teams and their business processes. It may well be that in a family case in a law firm, it might take 6 months to get data back from court to be able to put into the workspace before you archive it. For a standard, residential conveyancing matter, you may actually have all the data straight away and you can have a lot shorter lead time. So it's building out a flexible process for each different team. Some firms do just put a carte blanche solution across for the entire firm. It really whatever works best for you. But with this one, you can see, make sure it's still closed, and 180 days later, move it into your archive database. Now, at that point, you can make decisions around that archive database. Is it hidden? Do you maintain the security it has today? And still allow fee earners or professionals to go and search archive for matters they have worked on? Or are you actually going to remove that ACL and actually just make it completely hidden and private at that point? Or what some firms are now looking to do is actually have 2 archive libraries. One where it preserves the same security that it had in iManage, and when a matter closes, I can go into archive, I can still see the matter, I can refer to it. But then I may have what's starting to be referred to as a deep archive. And that could be after 4 or 5 years, the files come out of your normal archive in sort of quotes and into that deep archive, and all security is removed. And typically only risk and compliance or a security officer has access to that data. One of the 2 of the things to think about in these types of scenarios are knowledge management. For all the best will in the world, working with KM teams for many years inside law firms, lawyers love to keep their own special precedents or contracts or revisions somewhere else in the system, usually within a workspace, and just recopy and paste it every time. So So you need to start looking at ways of identifying if that hidden knowledge data if you are going to restrict access to closed cases. The other point around deep archiving of data is, do you want to make it extensible to people? Do you want to make it searchable? Or are you going to make it so that it actually reduces the overhead on your idle system and actually gives you a lower cost of ownership of holding that data? Also, unarchiving is something that can actually trip a lot of firms up as well. This is an automated unarchiving process. So obviously we've declared it as a record, we've moved it to archive, we've now got a third step, which is actually to unarchive it. And this is an automated workflow for that. What this allows us to do is actually move it back from archive to our main database and actually undeclare the content as well. And that would be based around something like a value going true, picking up a change of status from an ERP, don't worry about any date criteria. So if that status changes, move it back. The issue with automated unarchiving rules, I should say, is the fact that you can end up in a cyclic sort of workflow where finance don't realize that by changing a status field, they can trigger massive data migration and movement across the DMS. What a lot of firms now do is actually do a manual unarchiving process to understand the reason why that matter needs to come back to your live DB. Is it because the matter has genuinely been closed in error or has actually been reopened for a case investigation? Or is it really that a lawyer's now just found another 100 emails and needs to file them into that matter? If it's the latter and it's just about adding content, Workspace Control Self-Service has an add-on function that I call Shadow Workspace. That would allow a help desk operator to generate a copy of the archived workspace in the live DB. It would have the same structure but none of the content, and would allow the professional to file the data to that shadow workspace, that copy. After a predetermined period of time, typically 7 days, that data is merged into the archive database. So I haven't had to go and unarchive sort of, I don't know, 50,000 documents just to add 100. It makes it a lot more clearer and seamless process, and actually obviously is a lot faster to the professional in turning around that request. But obviously archiving is something we've been doing at some firms for many years. One of the areas that we're now getting almost daily emails about is, right, I've got an archive, I need to start thinking about how I destroy some of this data. Obviously, for many years, all firms have been pretty good at managing physical paper records. Obviously, there's a tangible cost there to the facilities team, Iron Mountain, Crown, you know, the third parties that tend to manage this data are charging sort of fixed cost per box on the shelf. And it's very easy to make sure that you're keeping on top of that because of the bottom line costs into the firm. And typically they manage the shredding and the disposal of that data for you. With electronic data, what we've seen is we put it into an archive and we just sort of forget about it. And it grows and it grows and it gets bigger and bigger. And disk space is fairly sort of innocuous in terms of costing. It's hidden away in terms of your storage networks and your disk storage. But the regulatory issue around that still then remains. The fact that you're holding on to these vast multi-million document data sets that you're maintaining, you're backing up, but also the fact that now coming through with GDPR, the fact that the DSAR is now on the rise and that firms are getting quite concerned about, I could have to trawl 50 million documents rather than the 20 million that actually I should only have. How can we actually start to cull some of that data set and actually sort of clear it down? Now, the main way of doing that is via iManage Records Manager. So I'm going to fire into records. Now, today I'm just focusing on electronic records management, okay? IRM itself as a product can do physical and electronic and actually provide a unified, put my teeth in, solution across both platforms. What we would do is on any one-to-ones, if this is something you're interested in creating that unified solution, we would pull into it in more detail. But for today, we are just going through just the electronic content. So this is the administration console for IRM. This is a place where your records team your risk and compliance team, or maybe your IT team in a smaller organization, actually come in and configure the processes and the policies in order to destroy data inside iManage Work. Now, the first thing to note is with IRM, the documents don't leave your archive database. We manage what's called in place. So we take the metadata into another database, but the physical documents stay in the same store. We don't duplicate it. We don't move it away. It does remain inside iManage at all times. Now, when we're looking at destroying content, we have schedules. So a schedule is a collection of events that make up a retention policy. So I'm going to start actually with the events because it will start to make a little bit more sense. The first thing to note is we can have different events, and multiple events can be grouped together as inside a schedule as a workflow. The first one we've got here, I'm going to talk about today, a very simplistic workflow for, again, these corporate workspaces. I've archived them, now going to move into the destruction and the retention side. So here I've got a proof of destruction. So we're going to actually go through a step of approving content before anything is removed from the system. So if I open this up, this is a disposition event. Eligible items must have this event in the retention schedule. So we're going to set, after this event is completed, approved for destruction as a field. So without this, nothing would be destroyed. We're going to say this won't trigger until 6 years after it has been archived. And that's why we take the matter closure or the project closure date from an ERP. That can be set manually, and some firms have said to me, we want the lawyer to decide the retention policy or the retention schedule. Not a problem. We can use the metadata from iManage and synchronize that with any policies you set here. For this example, it is fully automated at this point. So we're going to say 6 years after that matter closure, we're going to send this out and say, right, you can get rid of it now. And we'll show you how that workflow looks to the end user. Obviously, if it is approved, we're going to want to destroy it. So we then set up the next phase, which is if it's set for a proof of destruction, it's 6 years after its closure date, then we're going to destroy it. When we talk about destruction within Records Manager, within IRM, a few things to think about here. The first is when we destroy the file itself, the document, we do a 5 times DoD overwrite. So that file cannot be recovered. It is gone unless you have it obviously on a backup somewhere else. But that file is forensically destroyed on the storage network. Also around that as well, destroying this file and overwriting it, we're going to keep a record though that you had the document. This is a very important part as well that people sort of tend to overlook, is the fact that it's no good just destroying content. Because somebody may come to you as part of an e-disclosure or as part of a DSAR and say, I know you've got document number 1234, it was a copy of my passport. Why haven't you provided it to me? Or in an e-discovery type scenario, we know that you acted on behalf of that client and advised them on the purchase of AN other business. Where are the documents that support around that? So we need to actually keep a record of everything we're doing and say, we had a document, 1234, it was an email and this was the subject, but we have destroyed it in line with our retention policies, and they would be obviously back to your engagement letter and your terms and conditions that people can be referred to that. But if we take these 2 events that we've got here, we can see inside the schedules, I find my corporate schedule, I have both the events. So it's a sequential workflow. I could add more events to this if I wished, depending on what I wanted to do. I can set other dates and type up other metadata into here as well, add notes and comments around the policy itself. Essentially, that is the piece of information, the policy that you're applying to that workspace type in order to make sure that the right data and the right policy is applied. Obviously, people say, what about, that's fine, that's across the entire workspace. What about specific document types? You can set policies down to individual documents themselves. Maybe you want to do a different policy for emails and correspondence in a matter versus actual physical documents and PDFs. We can be that granular. But the other one that people ask about is the fact that I want to destroy everything in a Matter workspace, but not anything that I've classed as a will or a deed or a trust document, because these documents typically have to be held in perpetuity until that client either asks for the physical document and tells you can get rid of it, or moves it to a different organization. Within that, I've got one here for wills. Basically, this is using the legal hold functionality, and that will ensure that any document classified as a will, the doc type, will be excluded from any retention policy applied to the parent workspace or folder. So it actually ties that together for you, and just make sure if somebody by accident saves a will into a corporate workspace, it's not going to be destroyed. It is going to be kept and managed within the system. And obviously you can have as many of those as you require. Looking at the workflow side, it used to be that when stuff came up for destruction, it was down to a records manager. Somebody like that to press the button and say, yeah, we can get rid of that now, we can get rid of this now. But a lot of the time, they don't always understand the matter. They might understand what it's about. Or actually, there may be something going on. You may be in litigation around a certain matter or client that you've represented. And the fact they don't know that this is going on, and you need to hold on to this data. So within IRM 10, there is something called the disposition workflow. This is triggered by the schedules that we have set up. So after that, when you remember the first phase of that schedule was approved for destruction, we've got a simple two-step process. The professional, and that could be the matter manager, the client partner, your risk and compliance team, whoever you define as being the person that provides that first level authorization of that content, gets an email like this. And it will say, you've been asked to review, there are matters and records coming up for destruction, do you want to get rid of them? So you click on the link, start reviewing records, and you go to a page like this. This basically shows you all of the matters that are now coming up for destruction, the number of eligible records and their statuses. So you see this top one, sorry, apologies for the small font. There has none been actioned for the Acme Corporation, but if we look at Amazon below it, we see we've got 1,000 records to manage, and we've got 200 that have already been approved, 10 that have been not approved. Maybe that went through a preliminary approval process with somebody more junior, maybe a senior associate. It's now come to me as the matter manager or the client partner for final sign-off. I can click on the show more details. That's going to allow me to see the actual documents and actually to get a feeling for the case. Actually, I can then click on there and view the actual document itself as well, if I want to go through them briefly to check them. If I decide, right, yeah, I know all these cases, I remember them from 5, 6 years ago, it's fine, they can all be destroyed, I haven't got any outstanding issues with them, I can select multiple or singular, and then approve or don't approve, so approve or reject, to take it to the next phase of processing. If I say approve, it's fine, it moves it one step forward. In this case, in my workflow, it would go to a records manager. Just for a final tick the box, go and get them destroyed. It could just go straight to the system and do a destruction if I wanted to on this process. But on some of these, we've selected do not approve. So if we don't want to approve it, we need to give a justification. So we can say we want to change the retention schedule, we want to place a legal hold, but we need to justify why we're doing this, why we're breaching, in essence, the firm's overall retention policy. We could type a reason in there, click confirm, and then that would go to another layer of authorization. Maybe as a partner, if I want to retain a matter for whatever reason longer than retention, it goes to my head of risk and compliance. And they have to agree with me, and they might give me a call and say, you've asked for the Amazon matter on corporate restructuring to be extended for another 4 years. Can you tell me why? Why is our policy not working for you at this point in time? And they have a discussion, and maybe they feel it's reasonable to do that. The out-of-the-box workflow, you have this single or two-step approval, and these come pre-shipped. Things like responsible lawyer or records manager are actually identified from metadata on the workspace. Most people would have a matter partner or a client partner in the legal world on there. In non-legal, there's usually some sort of project owner or project manager assigned at that level. And we'll pull that from AD or from an HR system to get hold of their email address and the actual routing. Or you can have a completely more customized, configured process depending on the depth and level you require within the firm. But we touched on it earlier around once we've destroyed something, we want to actually keep an eye on it and actually maybe refer back to what we've done. So within the admin tool here, and typically this would be done on request by the records team or by risk, you can actually say, can you run me a report? I'm getting some queries about this matter, why we haven't got this data anymore. So we can go in and run a full report across any action, any client, any matter throughout the systems. This is one like in a Blue Peter, is one I prepared earlier for the Enron Corporation matter 002. And I said, look, just give me a report of everything that we have done across the content within that matter within records. So we can see in here we've removed some child's records, we've added some records, i.e. electronic content, any comments that we've added as well. It's fully snapshotted in here, and that can be very granular indeed. What we can also see here as a records manager, maybe I want to keep an eye on, is everything being destroyed on time. So I can actually run a report against my 6 years after matter close eligibility report and actually see when are the next cases coming up that will go into that workflow. So I can see all of the matters, the files they associate with, and when they will be eligible for that workflow to kick off. The one thing I can't show you is actually a destroyed item in these reports. This is actually a shared demo system and very little content. What I'm actually going to be doing, working with iManage next week, is to actually do a disposition, destroy some data, create a report based on showing you how that looks, and then I'll pass that to Derek to circulate to everyone on the team, just so you can see how it looks after the fact if you are questioned. This is an area where a lot of people are sort of missing a point and missing a trick. A lot of people are saying, I just want to go and delete data. You really need to have that something to refer back to when you are questioned. Because just by physically destroying a document inside iManage, maybe as an administrator, right-click, hard delete, you're not going to have any audit trail around who did that or when they did it or why they did it.
Into record management, so physical record.
So, got a couple of questions coming in here, so I'm just going to pause here and answer a couple of these. So, Derek, can you just want to read me a couple out?
Yeah, sure. So, so does this tool link to physical records management?
Absolutely. So, as I say, it was more about the electronic side of the world today. But here, you can see I've actually gone into the records top part here, and you can see we've got all about file parts, labels, barcoding. So, it would manage as a solution standalone all of your physical records. What it can also do, though, which is a neat feature, if you're working with one of the larger records management houses, somebody like Iron Mountain, for instance, they may already have a web portal. So if you want to do a box return, you can go into that web portal, type in the numbers, and the box turns up at the lawyer's desk 3 days later. What we can do with IRM is we can actually integrate with that third-party system. They typically use a very standardized protocol. What that would allow me to do from iManage is I'm working on a case. Maybe we've already had some records come in. They've been shipped out to storage. I need to recall them. I can do all of that from inside the iManage Work 10 UI by going to the Records tab, and it's the one page that I haven't got running in this demo. I can go in and request it from there, and that would integrate with that third-party record solution, and they would come back. You can put workflow around this, around authorization. So if somebody asks for, I don't know, 10,000 box files by 7 a.m. tomorrow morning, you may want to query that question because obviously the charges and the logistical issues of managing that many physical files.
Great. Okay, so this in effect we are branding as a record light. How does this differ from what we've had running previously, which is the records manager, the full records management tool?
So full-blown records manager is the physical side. With Records Lite, all we're looking at is the electronic data and managing that in place and coupling that with the disposition workflow for authorized destruction. With full IRM, you can manage that physical side of your business as well, manage it with a single retention policy. So rather than the schedule just concerning electronic, that could cover not just the electronic workspace, but any physical files that you have applied and sent to storage. You've also got all of the barcoding and sort of more traditional records management side for physical management, in terms of managing that content and doing box returns, file parts, labels, and everything that you would typically expect around that IRM world.
How can this, if it can, help with DSAR requests?
Well, typically you're reducing the amount of content that you're going to have to manage as part of a DSAR. As I said at the top, a lot of firms are carrying 30, 40, 50 million documents within their DMS system. But really, if you look at the percentages, how many matters are actually live and how many are older than 7 years old? A lot of the firms that we work with have had iManage over 10 years. So there's quite a wealth of content that could legitimately, depending on your governance and retention policies, and that is an area where we would talk to your risk team and to understand that depending on the markets and the areas you operate, and also actually the areas of law that you're practicing in, interesting points around that, about the matter type and the age of the person. But really it's around reducing that data corpus to allow you to return the DSAR a lot more quickly.
And are people using IDLE to search using IDLE for the search and the DSAR requests? I
mean, IDLE's a powerful search, full text search indexer. It can search, as everyone's probably aware on the call, can search pretty much everything in every document, with the caveat that it needs to be OCR'd and have a text layer on it. Obviously, there are products that Phoenix supply to overcome that. But essentially, IDLE will search for, if you've scanned people's passports and you've OCR'd them, we're going to pick up on the passport number. Or if we've got somebody's name and address inside a contract, maybe an employment contract, that's going to be indexed and searchable. DSARs are an interesting subject. I've got firms that are really looking at these, and there is verbiage, and I'm going to put my hand up, so I'm not a complete expert on this, but there is verbiage there around, yes, I can ask for a DSAR and I don't have to pay my £10 anymore, and you have however many days it is to respond, but there has to be a justification for that. And organisations are looking at what they would deem as an acceptable request mechanism to actually service that, and actually not just having it open and a carte blanche. I have heard of firms taking sort of upwards of 16 to 18 man-hours per request just to identify the data that they're looking for, if it is all in iManage. That's not including looking in systems like email or CRM. And then you've also got the issues of bundling that data into a format that users can actually handle.
Okay, so if you like what we see here, how does this then fit within the organization? How is it distributed? And not necessarily just from a licensing point of view, but who are the operators, who are the people that give them the rights to operate the system?
Well, certainly from an electronic point, there's not that much interaction with the business in terms of them having to do loads of different stuff. I would always start a project off like this around actually working with the senior members of the firm. I haven't seen a governance and destruction policy that hasn't had almost exec board partnership approval, because you are dealing with data destruction. It is a subject that makes a lot of organizations nervous. They know they need to do it, but you want to get it right. So start looking at your policies. Start looking at your physical policy if you have one, and will that work in an electronic world? Is it granular enough? Is it up to date? And is it being enforced? Once you've got that set up, you're really looking at transposing those settings into the IRM system. You're looking at setting up an automated archiving workflow to actually capture it all into a single repository, which then the schedules would then impact on. And really, the training that you need to provide to a business is around that workflow, around disposition, and training those members of staff that you sort of identify would be dealing with approval for destruction around their obligation to that data, and why they're actually clicking yes, get rid of it, and actually the impact and the ownership of them of doing such a thing.
And how is this licensed, Graham?
Actually, for once with iManage, fairly straightforward. Yeah, I know, it's a miracle really. There's a server cost for the IRM server. You then have a CAL for every user in your firm, because this system is essentially managing documents created by any person, and you have a license to access the administration console. Typically in a mid-tier firm, you may have 2 administrators on the platform. Really, once these policies are set, you're not typically changing them that often. You know, governance frameworks are based around regulatory requirements around data protection. So for my advice would be you set these up. Yes, you may need to change them. You may need to come in and add a new policy if you start dealing with a different area of law, or you start working in a different place. But certainly around this, it's around that planning phase that is the key.
So for example, the risk and compliance team could, or the risk and best practice team could set up as an administrator on there?
Yeah, I mean, risk and compliance, some firms have fairly detailed records teams. And sometimes IT aren't always aware of the role that they play in the organization. I've certainly seen this from demonstrations and meetings inside firms. This typically comes from IT because it's electronic data, so it's under their purview to actually manage. But we get to meet with the records managers, we show them this information, these systems, they go, yeah, well, we know all about this, we know how to use these tools. We'll take this on and we'll sort of just keep managing it as we do in the physical world. If that's not the case and it's risk or it's IT, there is training and there is awareness, but it really depends on your business and the actual knowledge level of staff around these types of solutions.
This is quite a common theme here, but how do we deal with the inordinate amount of orphan documents which we've currently got in the system?
So there's a couple of ways of handling this. The first one would be to use the Workspace Control Document Sweeper, which is built in, to sweep any orphans and make sure that's on, and sweep content back into the workspace that once it came from. And really, by best practice, you should have that running. Also, as part of any implementation, you want to be identifying, do you have an orphan documents problem? How have they been caused? Are they historic? Are they due to users having permissions to create folders which they then delete an orphan content? However it may be. And I would certainly suggest as part of the services engagement that that problem is dealt with. But at a very granular level, you could just sweep all orphans into a single workspace and actually say 7 years after create and put a flat rule. It's a very minor amount, though, of the data that you would be managing. And depending on the firm, it could range from a few hundred to 10, sort of multi-10,000 documents. So I'd like to play that one on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, and in a similar vein, we've got a question here, and I think it's on the same type of questions. Can policies be applied to workspaces that don't have client matter metadata?
Absolutely. Client matter is not a prerequisite like some iManage systems to identify. A great example of that would be personal workspaces, for instance. So within archiving, we could set rules up to say, right, for personal workspaces, you'd still have the status field on there, but maybe that's a manual change. So when somebody leaves, part of your exit process would be as an admin to go in and change their workspace to be closed. The rules would say for personal workspaces, 1 day after that's set, move it to archive, declare it as record, without that sort of window to add content to. And then IRM has their own policy for personal workspace destruction based on the workspace type.
Great. Well, it seems to be all very quiet, Graham. You seem to have done an extremely good job. There's not too many questions coming through now.
Everyone's asleep. It's governance and record.
Well, they might be outside in the sunshine.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
Okay, so I think we're going to draw this to a close a little bit early. Much to the pleasure of everybody, I'm sure. We've had 100% attendance, so thank you very much for attending this and giving us your time. As I stated at the start, please contact me and I will point you to the recording of this. And also I'm going to put together the questions that have been asked, and just so you've got a chat there as well and to answer some of those questions. But email me and we'll make this available so you can download it and listen to it. And please contact me if you want some one-off sessions for extending this. If it's of interest and you believe this can help you with your needs, then just contact me, and Graham, myself and Graham's teams will be more than happy to come out and talk to you and your relevant teams internally. Again, from Graham and myself, thank you very much for your time. We look forward to speaking to you soon.
Thanks, everyone. Take care. Cheers. Bye.